Sorry, stand up.
The committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. The chair wishes to make an announcement that is particularly regretful for the majority side. But Beth Zork, the senior counsel for our Financial Institutions Subcommittee, let me think of ways I can embarrass her. Beth, would you please stand? Her last day with us is Friday. She came from the Senate. She is returning to the Senate. Lord only knows why. I can only anticipate she will advocate for all House Financial Services Committee matters with the other body, but we will miss her, and she will always remain an honorary member of our Financial Services Committee staff. Round of applause for Ms. Zork. Pursuant to notice, I call up the committee print of the proposed oversight plan for the 114th Congress, and I move its adoption. The clerk will report.
Pursuant to Clause 2D1 of Rule 10 of the House of Representatives, the following agenda...
Without objection, the print is considered read and open to amendment at any point. I strike the last word and recognize myself for 5 minutes. I think as all members know, the rules of the House require every standing committee to adopt an oversight plan. The Financial Services Committee meets today to fulfill our obligation under this particular rule. And more importantly, we will meet to assure that America's hard-working taxpayers, we wish to assure them that this committee takes this obligation seriously to them. We will do everything in our power to make sure that agencies under our jurisdiction treat the funds that they are appropriated, the funds they have at their disposal, taxpayer funds, that they treat them with respect. It is not Washington's money, it is the taxpayers' money. And the taxpayers work hard to earn it. They work hard to pay their taxes, and they rightfully demand efficiency. They rightfully demand accountability. They rightfully demand measurable results. No one in Washington, Republican or Democrat, should ever be allowed to carelessly spend hard-earned taxpayers' money, and that is why this committee will continually and vigilantly monitor every agency and every program under our jurisdiction. Hopefully, we feel this is a bipartisan mission and a bipartisan commitment. If a program isn't working, if it does more harm than good, it is time to reform it or it is time to get rid of it. If policies and regulations don't make common sense, let's make them sensible. That will lead to a better economy. Effective oversight is what makes it possible for us to craft responsible and effective solutions. I look forward to working with members on both sides of the aisle to meet these challenges. Although our committee bears the name of the Financial Services Committee, I've always considered that our committee probably should be named the Economic Growth, Upward Mobility, and Financial Security Committee. And when the American financial system works properly, this is exactly what it helps foster. It fuels entrepreneurship and innovation. It allows workers to invest in their retirement so they will have a more secure future. It ensures consumers have access to affordable credit so they can make their lives better and take care of their family needs, from everything from a car to a home to braces for a kid's teeth. I have recent and personal knowledge of the cost of the latter. As all of us know, consumers remain very concerned about the economy. Still, too many live paycheck to paycheck. Too many have seen their paycheck that I would hope members of both sides of the aisle will be committed to, that we will have a healthier, more robust economy. By no means is the oversight plan that we are submitting today, in no way is it exhaustive. There is no way a good, realistic plan could be. But as noted in the plan's preamble, that does not preclude us from investigating other programs or issues that are not specifically mentioned if warranted by circumstances. This plan was designed and written in a bipartisan spirit. It was designed and written to try to address many, perhaps even most member concerns, not necessarily all. But it was, again, written, although I'm not a golfer, Down the middle of the fairway is how it was designed. We listened carefully to try to incorporate a number of member concerns. Again, I believe that this can be a bipartisan plan. I believe its implementation can be bipartisan. I urge its adoption. I yield back the balance of my time. I recognize the ranking member for an opening statement at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by saying that I appreciate the straightforward and clear manner in which this oversight plan has been drafted. Mr. Chairman, I'm pleased you have decided to make this document, which is designed to discuss the issues of this committee, that this committee will examine throughout the 114th Congress, non-controversial. This is a dramatic and very positive departure from the Republican plan in the last Congress, which was more contentious, inflammatory, and ideological. While we are certain to disagree on many of the topics our committee will cover the next 2 years, this document appropriately highlights the issues, agencies, and laws that will occupy our time. However, our caucus has its own beliefs as to what the mission and larger purpose of this committee should be. I expect you'll be hearing from my Democratic colleagues as this markup moves forward. I, for one, believe this committee should be focused on ensuring that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. After the vast destruction of wealth caused by the financial crisis, it is imperative that we protect American workers and taxpayers by minimizing the booms and busts of an unstable market. That's why we need strong rules that keep Wall Street stable and prevent their excessive risk from damaging Main Street. We have made great progress with the passage of the Wall Street Reform Act, which protects consumers from the deceptive practices and products that led to the 2008 crisis, creates transparency in previously opaque markets, provides shareholders with more say over the governance of corporations, and gives financial regulators new tools to detect and prosecute fraud. But as we've seen just the first few weeks of this Congress, Republicans in the House are determined to repeal, weaken, or pressure regulators to significantly alter Dodd-Frank, even if that means holding must-pass legislation like government funding bills hostage. That's why I was so pleased last night to hear our President say he would veto any legislation that would unravel Wall Street reform. As we begin this new Congress, this committee ought to be highlighting the achievements of one of the signature accomplishments of Dodd-Frank, creating the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, an agency that has been a remarkable success story in standing up for consumers, students, the elderly, and our service members who have been subject to deceptive practices of unscrupulous corporations and financial institutions. I'm not sure why Republicans continue working to undermine this important watchdog, and we are instead siding with the unscrupulous payday lenders, debt collectors, mortgage servicers, and other institutions that previously operated in the shadows. The CFPB is already returning $4.8 billion to consumers harmed by wrongful practices, and it's taken enforcement actions against bad actors to clean up the system so that honest small businesses can thrive and create jobs. And speaking of creating jobs, we must extend the Export-Import Bank's charter for the long term to ensure it continues to support hundreds of thousands of workers and keeps the playing field level so that American businesses, large and small, can compete successfully in global markets. Democrats are also committed to ensuring that all Americans have the opportunity to purchase a home or affordably rent one by preserving the time-tested approaches that provide certainty to American homebuyers, like the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage and continued access to affordable rental housing. Last Congress, this committee held one single hearing on public and assisted housing, sending a clear message regarding the majority's lack of interest in the housing needs of poor, elderly, and disabled Americans. That track record shameful. especially given the devastating sequester cuts that crippled important programs that help low and moderate income families. And Republicans continue to block important housing bills, including those that would protect tenants from foreclosure, preserve home ownership, and indeed increase access to credit for credit-worthy borrowers. Finally, we must take a closer look at important issues we too often overlook. That includes the need to reform our nation's consumer reporting system, which often causes needless heartbreak, frustration, and devastation as a result of incomplete or erroneous information on credit reports. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair by his watch notes that the spirit of bipartisanship lasted about a minute 42 seconds, but not bad for this committee. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition? Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Waters. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Waters, my top priorities for the Financial Services Committee is to respond to the pressing needs of people all over this country who are either poor, working poor, middle class. The fact is, this committee has broad jurisdiction, and I hope that we spend much of our time not only responding to the needs of people who are doing extremely well, but also to respond to the needs of people who are struggling in this land of opportunity. You know, this committee has responsibility to improve living conditions in cities like Ferguson, Missouri, New York City, Cleveland, Ohio, and other parts of our country, including North Minneapolis, where I live. We all have to be and should be concerned about the reemergence of concentrated poverty in our country. And the communities that I'm speaking of, more than 2,000 of them have poverty rates at more than 40%. This committee could do something about that. After falling in the 1990s, these numbers have increased. Nationwide, more than 11 million people live in such high poverty neighborhoods. Of those, more than 5 million qualify as poor. Concentrated poverty is not just a problem for rural communities or inner city communities. As this chart that I've shared with everybody shows, it affects suburban communities as well. In fact, every member of this committee has people in your community who are struggling and in poverty and perhaps working full-time. In my own district, the economic downturn and the legacy of redlining has resulted in rampant disinvestment in a number of communities. Communities like the Phillips neighborhood in South Minneapolis, home to Little Earth, which is one of the largest urban American Indian communities in the United States, and the Hawthorne neighborhood in Minneapolis' historically African-American North Side, experienced concentrated poverty exacerbated by lack of jobs, opportunity, and high rents, and the list goes on. These two communities that I just referenced in my own district were also hardest hit by the foreclosure crisis. We know that foreclosure crisis was driven in part by predatory marketing of high-cost subprime loans to people of color and poor whites. We must ensure that these predatory products are stopped. Which congressional committee has a responsibility for responding to these struggling towns and neighborhoods in a holistic way? Which committee has the job to create communities of opportunity? Well, Mr. Chairman, I think this is this committee. This is our committee. And yes, Wall Street has its place in our committee and will command some of our time. Big banks will too. But what about people in this country who believe in the American dream and who just want a chance to get on the ladder? In fact, until last session, the Subcommittee on Housing and Insurance was entitled the Subcommittee on Housing, Insurance, and Community Opportunity. I hope that we restore the words "and community opportunity." I want to assure you, I believe sincerely that the ideological differences between us have nothing to do with where our hearts are or what we care about in terms of helping people. My Republican friends doubt the power of government to make a positive impact in people's lives, and I believe overestimate the power of the private sector to make meaningful changes across our society all the time. I think government can help. I think private sector has an important role to play too. But this doesn't mean there are not a number of serious and important things we can do together. The lines do cross, and we have an opportunity and a responsibility to find where they do and operate to help all Americans not just the people who really don't need our help and are often found saying, get government off my back, until they need a bailout. More than 2.5 million kids in school are homeless. In the crisis in affordable rental housing is at epic proportions. Wages are stagnant, but rent keeps are rising. In fact, apartment rents have risen nationally 23% for 23 straight quarters. Rents are 15% higher than they were in 2009. 11 million families pay more than half their income in rent. Only 1 in 4 families is eligible for housing assistance actually receives it. And at the start of last year, every Democrat on this committee sent a letter to the chairman requesting a series of hearings on poverty. Now, Mr. Chairman, I know that not only Democrats care about poverty. I am certain that many Republican members care about poverty too. We might not agree on how to solve it or how to address it, but we all care about it. So let's get together and figure out what to do about it.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Who seeks recognition? Are there any amendments? Oh, I'm sorry. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to follow on some of the comments from Mr. Ellison and point out that I think there is an important aspect of the committee's jurisdiction that I would ask for greater attention to be applied to, and it has to do with the particular challenges faced by many of America's cities, particularly America's older industrial cities. While federal policy, at least federal policy under the jurisdiction of this committee related to cities is focused primarily on housing policy, or at least in terms of the built environment, it's primarily focused on housing policy. Like my colleague, I do believe that a broader interpretation of our jurisdiction would be in order. For many of the communities that I represent, and this is true of not just communities in the Northeast and Midwest, but many communities that I've worked in the South and in the West, federal programming and the oversight of federal programming begs the question as to whether or not those efforts to stabilize neighborhoods through, for example, the Community Development Block Grant Program or the HOME Program, or in the case of recent activity, the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. The question, I think, occurs as to whether those programs are sufficient or even properly tailored to produce the outcomes that they purport to attempt to produce. My point is this, that we can spend an awful lot of time, and will and should spend an awful lot of time on this committee trying to find ways to breathe life into the housing sector. But if we do so with the notion that access to credit and a rational mortgage financing system by itself is going to deliver stability to some of these stressed markets, we're missing a very important part of the equation. It would seem to me that a legitimate area of exploration for this committee would be to take a look at federal policy as it relates to two particular questions. One, whether or not the communities that we're trying to infuse with new investment have the fiscal capacity to provide the essential public services necessary to sustain markets in the first place. And as the Chairman and others might recall, I've raised this question as individuals have come before the committee. I've raised it with both Chairman Bernanke, Chair Yellen, with Secretary Liu, with others. And often I'm concerned because it seems as though this question of the health, the fiscal sustainability, the fiscal integrity of America's cities, which are essential to our productive capacity, but that this issue is somewhat of an orphan issue. And to me, unless this committee, which I think is the most appropriate committee, takes up this question and attempts to daylight some of the underlying challenges facing these older industrial communities particularly, we are going to continue to find frustration in trying to develop housing policy, which doesn't seem to work in some of the markets where we're trying as hard as we can to try to breathe new life. There's another element of this, and it has to do with how we can structure some of the interventions, some of the programs, to incentivize private investment. So to me, while I think there is a legitimate public role in targeting federal resources to help communities rebuild, unless we have policy that deals with the underlying needs of communities to provide quality essential services and to incentivize private investment, the frustration that those on the other side of the aisle and those of us on this side of the aisle will share is that despite our differences as to the level of support that we think these programs might need to provide communities, we're both going to be frustrated because absent an approach to the problems that I just identified, I don't think any amount of money is going to be sufficient to solve the problems that these communities face. And I think that's a legitimate area of exploration for the committee, and I would kindly ask consideration as we move forward over the next couple of years that we take a very close look at that question. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair would note again that the chair will recognize any member to strike the last word so he can speak on whatever topic he or she may choose. As a reminder to all members, we are marking up an oversight plan, not a policy agenda. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I want to start out by saying thank you, Mr. Chair. You indicated at the top of your remarks that you had endeavored to hit this ball down the middle of the fairway. I think you frankly did exactly that. Thank you.
Would the gentleman yield, just in case the clerk didn't hear that, could you repeat one more time what you said?
I A, intend on repeating it, and B, would like you to give me a little more time for your interruption.
The gentleman yielded an additional 30 seconds to agree with the chairman.
I think we're a lot better off when we start out sidestepping the controversies and enabling us to start focusing on where we agree. And that's what this does. So again, Mr. Chair, thank you, sincerely. I have made, as an example, no secret of my advocacy for reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank, which I believe supports not just thousands of jobs in my state, but thousands of jobs in many states. And it's also no secret that the Chair and I have what I believe are honest differences of opinion about that reauthorization, and those differences should be respected just as the opinions of every member of this committee should be respected. And this oversight plan enables us to respect those differences at the outset of this debate. We actually, through fits and starts and difficult labor, have been able in the last 2 years to work together and overcome differences on a series of issues. They didn't all come easy, they didn't all come quickly, but they came. Flood insurance, TRIA, insurance capital standards, and my own experience working with Congressman Fitzpatrick on significantly changing FHA reverse mortgage standards, for which I thank him again. And this will enable us, I believe, to start out with that clean slate and an unbiased point of view to find those commonalities as well on the Export-Import Bank. Because at the end of the day, what I believe is every member of this committee wants a strong American manufacturing sector and does not want to unilaterally disarm, which is what I believe it would be. Another area of concern of mine, which I think this plan gives an authorizing environment for commonality to, is protecting our service members and veterans. As you've heard probably too often, I have the great privilege to represent Joint Base Lewis McChord, the largest force projection base on the West Coast and an integral part of our national security environment, and a district, by the way, that in terms of Democrats is the third highest concentration of veterans in America. And to that end, protecting them from financial scams and stress is very important to me, and I believe very important to every member of this committee. And I believe every member of this committee believes as well that Holly Petraeus and the Office of Service Members Affairs at CFPB has done an excellent job safeguarding those individuals. They have been scammed left and right. There is documented evidence to that effect. Just last year, I think it was, the Bureau found cause of action for such abuses in the instance of 16,000, yes, you heard that correctly, complaints from soldiers, sailors, and Marines, and they received, as a result, $92 million in redress. And I think everyone here wants to work toward that end. In the spirit of bipartisanship, last year I met with the Office of Service Member Affairs and learned about a key mortgage protection for veterans that was expiring. Reached out, worked with Congressman Fincher, and we were able to get a bill UC to extend foreclosure protection to them that would have expired. I thank Mr. Fincher for that again. As I speak, I'm working with Mr. Stiver's office and Mr. Pittinger's to improve the CFPB, because this is not to say that it is perfect. It can be improved, and those bipartisan efforts can help do that. And finally, I bring up the issue of NAHASDA, another bipartisan compromise bill from last year. Mr. Pierce introduced this bill. He's reintroduced it. I thank you, sir. I joined he and Mr. Kildee and Ms. Moore in support of that, and I look forward to completing our work on NAHASDA in a bipartisan fashion, as we did last year, to give our tribes needed certainty in their housing program, and giving this committee another bipartisan success to build upon. So finally, Mr. Chair, let me end where I began. Thank you very much. This document gives us a chance for success, and I appreciate it, and I know others do as well. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member as well. Mr. Chairman, I'm still concerned about small banks. The empirical evidence seems to indicate that small banks were not a part of the reason, not a significant part of the reason why we had our experience in '08. Small banks did not engage in what we call exotic products. They were not in the business of getting involved with credit default swaps, 327s, 228s, no doc loans, low doc loans, liar's loans. They were just not a part of that. And I'm concerned because 90% of all of the banks in this country have assets under $1 billion. And I spoke to some bankers just recently, and there's a real concern about the viability of banks under $1 billion. Banks under $1 billion are having some serious viability problems. And I think that this committee has a duty, a responsibility, and in fact an obligation to look into this and ascertain what is it that we can do to prevent the banks that are in communities, note that I didn't say community banks, banks that are in communities, that are in areas that are not, generally speaking, where our large institutions are marketing themselves for some of the products that the small banks routinely deal with. In rural areas, we have small banks. They do know people in these neighborhoods, in these areas, and the people are dependent upon these banks. I'm really concerned about the viability of 90% of all banks. That piece of evidence in and of itself speaks volumes about where we should be. If they are at risk, we ought to look into this and see what we can do to mitigate and eliminate the risk. I believe in small banks. My friends and my neighbors, when I grew up, we all related to a small bank in the neighborhood. When I had an opportunity to go to law school, it was a small bank that was very helpful. And I think we have a debt, most of us, that we owe to small banks. I hope that this committee will look into it. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time, who seeks recognition. Does it, for purposes generated from Wisconsin, seek recognition?
We'll strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, ranking members. And I want to thank my colleagues for the opportunity to serve for the very first time as a ranking member on a subcommittee, the Subcommittee on Monetary Policy and Trade. I think the jurisdiction under that subcommittee is extremely important to all of us as it relates to our responsibility to participate in sort of the soft power or the other power other than military engagement around the globe to promote national security. Certainly, the E&C Committee will be focusing on cybersecurity, and certainly the Armed Services Committee and other committees will be dealing, and Intelligence Committee will be dealing with other aspects of national security, as our President has asked for authority to authorize war against the ISIS threat. But under our jurisdiction, we have a great deal of work, I think, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member and members, that could be done with respect to whether or not we carefully craft and engage in and further economic sanctions, while we look at our security with respect to the Export-Import Bank and the kind of leverage that provides us throughout the nations. As the President pointed out last evening in the State of the Union address, 95% of the consuming public lives outside of the United States. Certainly, we need to monitor the exchange rates, look at currency manipulations, and certainly I'm very excited about the work that we have begun on extractive industry and vulture funds. I do think that we need to really seriously look at replenishing those funds, IMF funds and other funds, Agora, that are under our jurisdiction, because I think that they contribute a great deal to our arsenal with respect to international security. Being able to participate in a global sense and to use our financial credibility and clout throughout the world is certainly a power that could outweigh the so-called boots-on-the-ground strategy that many of us often prefer. So I'm very, very excited, along with my Democratic colleagues who have chosen and have been assigned to this subcommittee. And I look forward to working with the majority party to make sure that we do our due diligence on this subcommittee in leveraging our jurisdiction and making this a very safe country for us. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Are there any amendments? If no amendments, the question occurs on adopting the oversight plan. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it. And the oversight plan is adopted. A motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair looks forward to having the markup on the budget views go just as smoothly and quickly as the oversight plan. For what purpose does the ranking member seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition to name Democratic members to the committee's subcommittees.
The gentlelady is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent to enter to the record this resolution that will do just that.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, pursuant to the committee's organizing resolution, I name Democratic members to subcommittees as reflected in that document. And I thank the members and congratulate them on their new assignments.
So ordered. There being no further business before the committee, we stand adjourned.